Hello and welcome back to Meet the Researcher Online by PenPRIG, the Peninsular Parkinson's Research Interest Group. Treatments to stop progression and preferably repair the damage caused by Parkinson's are long overdue. Perhaps the reasons for this are wrapped up in the complexity of the condition. 3 videos explain the response by Parkinson's UK to this problem, starting with this introduction to the Virtual Biotech by Bale. As always, PenPRIG's emphasis is on the use of layman's language throughout the talks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to introduce Claire Bale to speak about the Parkinson's UK Virtual Biotech organisation. This will be a talk of approximately 20 minutes, Claire?
Let's hope so.
And with that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's lovely to be back talking to the PenPRIG group again after a bit of a hiatus. So my name's Claire Bale. I'm the Head of Research Communications and Engagement at Parkinson's UK, and it's lovely to be here to talk a little bit more about our Virtual Biotech programme, which is a programme we launched in 2017 and is quite a unique and pioneering idea for a charity to be getting involved with. So it's a little bit different to our usual research activities, and it's great to be here to talk a little bit more about it. So let's make a start. I thought I'd start by just talking very briefly about why we need to do something different, why we need a virtual biotech program, why we're sort of shifting our approach slightly to research. And the reason is we desperately need better Parkinson's treatments, and we need them yesterday. We need to make sure they're getting through to people with Parkinson's as quickly as possible. And the traditional way that research has been funded by most charities doesn't seem to be delivering the results we want as quickly as we want them. And that's despite the fact that there's been a phenomenal amount of progress, huge breakthroughs in our understanding of Parkinson's, especially in the last 20 years or so. We hear all the time in the news, in the media, about new insights, new discoveries that are happening in Parkinson's research. We now know things like a lot more about the genetic architecture of Parkinson's and different genes that might be playing a part in the condition and in the risk of developing the condition. We know that tiny little batteries present in all of our cells in our body called mitochondria stop working properly in the cells that are affected by Parkinson's in the brain. That means they can't make enough energy to do their jobs and ultimately causes them to struggle. We know that the cells involved in Parkinson's also struggle to recycle waste properly. So all our cells have a waste disposal system and a way to get rid of things that shouldn't be there anymore, old proteins or things that aren't working properly. But this system doesn't seem to work very well in the cells affected in Parkinson's. And as a result, they can get clogged up with proteins that shouldn't be there anymore. We also know that these proteins that continue to float around in cells can start to clump together, forming bundles of proteins, sticky clumps that can cause problems and move from cell to cell inside the brain. So we're starting to understand and build a picture, a really much more complete picture of why Parkinson's happens. What is the chain of events that causes brain cells to stop working properly and ultimately die in the condition? We're also, through research, understanding that it isn't just about the dopamine producing cells in Parkinson's. It's not only those that are affected. There are other neurotransmitters, chemical messages in the brain that get disrupted in Parkinson's, and there are other brain areas as well that become affected. And that's why Parkinson's has such a range of symptoms, and it isn't just about movement. It's also about other things like mood and cognition, sleep. All sorts of things can be affected. And we really need to be developing treatments that look at other ways of treating the condition. To date, we've been very reliant on dopamine replacement therapies in Parkinson's. So the first of those was developed in the 1960s and is levodopa. And we're still, most people with Parkinson's will be taking dopamine replacement therapy, so medication that either increases the amount of dopamine inside the brain, prolongs the life of dopamine inside the brain, or mimics the effect of dopamine inside the brain. And these medications can be, very helpful, particularly in the early stages. But as the condition progresses, because they don't address any of the things I've just been talking about, they can't actually stop the progressive loss of dopamine producing cells. And that means that, things do get more complicated and difficult over time. We desperately need better treatments, and we have all this knowledge about what's going wrong inside the brain. So why isn't that knowledge translating into new and better therapies, things that can do more than simply replace dopamine and tackle movement symptoms? Why don't we have anything better yet? Let's have a look at how new treatments are developed, and then we can start to talk about why things are taking so long and how we can speed things up with our Virtual Biotech program. So this might be familiar to some people. On the left-hand side, in the pink bubble, we've got scientific discoveries. So this is the starting point, the bedrock of developing any new treatment for any condition. So scientific discoveries are about unraveling what's going on in the progression and development of a certain kind of condition. So in Parkinson's, I've been talking about some of the things we've discovered in the last 20 years or so that might be causing the condition to happen for people. This kind of work, this painstaking discovery work, is largely done in academia, so in universities, in hospitals. This kind of work is principally funded through charities like Parkinson's UK, but also through governments like our government in the UK that has the Medical Research Council, which funds a huge amount of basic science. So, blue sky research that's trying to understand how our bodies work and what goes wrong in disease. So that's the first step, but it's only the first step. When we make a discovery in the lab and identify, say, a new gene that might be involved in a condition, that's only the starting point. The next crucial stage is developing treatments based on that new knowledge. And that part of science it's sometimes done in universities and hospitals, but more frequently, and it's becoming more and more common for this part of the journey to a new treatment to be led by companies, specifically small companies called biotech companies. These are usually quite small, very focused companies. They might be working on just one new treatment and trying to take that knowledge to engineer a new therapy. It might most often it's a drug, a small molecule that could be taken in a pill, but it could be any kind of treatment. It could be a technology kind of treatment. We're seeing more and more of those kinds of startup companies. It could be stem cell based. It could be vaccine based. So there's many ways they could be developing a treatment, but this is a very specific kind of science. It's quite different, and the skills, expertise, and technologies required are quite different to that of the scientific discovery stage. And their focus is really developing this new treatment, designing it, engineering it, refining it, and taking it through some very clear stages of preclinical testing to check that it's safe in cells in the lab, it's doing what they expect it to, also in animal models, to see that it's safe and effective. If that stage is successful and then a new promising new treatment is created, then it will move forward into the next bubble of clinical trials. Now, I'm sure lots of people are already very familiar with the concept of clinical trials. This is where you're ready now to start testing your new therapy in people for the first time. So in phase 1, that's what you're doing, testing it for the very first time in humans. So quite often with completely new treatments, those people taking part in phase 1 might be healthy volunteers, so not people with Parkinson's. If it's proven to be safe in this very early stage of testing, it can move forward into phase 2, where you start to look at it in people with the condition of interest to see if it's safe in that population, and start to look at efficacy. So is it effective? Is it doing what you expect it to? And if that looks good, you can then move it into phase 3 trials. And that's where it's the real acid test of any new therapy. These trials in phase 3 are very large. They might be multinational, taking place all over the world, involving hundreds or even thousands of participants, and looking to see in a very big population to see, what's the safety of this new medicine or therapy, and how effective is it? Is it better than what we already have? Can we prove it? If you're successful there, then there are a couple more hoops still to jump through. The first is regulatory approval. So this is getting your new medicine or therapy rubber stamped by regulatory authorities. So in the UK, we have one called the MHRA. Might have heard about it a lot. They've been in the news a lot during the pandemic. So they're responsible for the approval of new medicines. Until you have MHRA approval in the UK, you cannot give that medicine to patients. There are also the EMA, the European version, and the FDA, which is in the US, who are also major authorities in this area. So if you get MHRA approval, we know that the medicine is safe and effective, but you still have to, in the UK at least, do negotiations with the NHS, for example, to make sure that it's affordable and the NHS can provide it for free to patients around the UK. So that's the process. As you might have guessed, it's a long, complicated journey, and lots of different players are involved along the way. So we've talked about, academics at universities and hospitals, small companies at the beginning stages of developing a new treatment, large pharmaceutical companies when it gets a little bit further along, regulatory authorities. Along the way, hopefully also charities and patients will be playing a role, as patients, of course, when it gets to clinical trials, but hopefully earlier than that as well. And we've talked about where the funding comes from. So at the beginning, it's largely charities and government agencies, and at the end, largely pharmaceutical companies. And what's positive is, we know there's lots of great work happening at the start of the process, loads of new scientific discoveries being made. We know that large pharmaceutical companies are there, ready and waiting for promising new drugs that they can take through the later stages of drug development and testing. But where we see a major gap is in this middle stage. So the process of actually starting to develop new treatments from discoveries made in the lab, and then that early stages of clinical testing in people. There is where there are biotechs, but there's not always the funding available to those biotechs to take their ideas forward. And if this work is coming out of universities, university researchers don't necessarily have the expertise and the skills and the resources to do this kind of work. So we see there's a really important gap here, a place where, great ideas can languish. And we want to step in with our Virtual Biotech program and take those great ideas and give them that helping hand that they need to progress them to the point where they can be taken over by, say, a large company to do the final stages. So here you are. This is where we see our Virtual Biotech program sitting. So it was, as I mentioned, it was launched in 2017. And it was brought in, and it was an idea, a brainchild of our director of the Virtual Biotech, Arthur Roach. So Arthur joined us after having a long career working in the pharmaceutical industry and also in biotech companies himself. And before that, he was in academia as well. So he sort of understands the process from lots of different perspectives. And he saw that this was a major gap from his time in industry. He'd seen that, there's lots of great ideas coming out of the scientific labs in universities, but not necessarily enough attention at this early stage to get them to the point where they're ready to be taken on by a larger pharmaceutical company. So he wanted to fill this gap, and he came up with this idea of us having a program specifically to target this important phase. So we've built a team now at Parkinson's UK of a small team in-house of scientific experts who have the skills, expertise and experience of working in this space. So we have now 3 drug discovery managers, Jan, Dave and Ivona, who all have previously worked in industry, in small biotechs or in similar roles, and they are able to scour the field and find the best ideas for new drug development projects, find the partners to work on them, and then work with those partners to take them forward. We also have Shona, who is our clinical studies portfolio manager, who works on the clinical trial side. So she does the same thing essentially, but with later stage projects, so projects that are already ready to start testing treatments in people with Parkinson's. And together we're able to bring that expertise, but also funding. So the Virtual Biotech program now has, we're looking to invest £4 to £6 million every year into projects in this critical phase, and so that we can accelerate their development through and push them further towards patients. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at how this actually works in practice. So what exactly, and how is our biotech virtual? That's a word that it can be a little bit ambiguous. So a biotech company is essentially just a company that uses research to develop new treatments, and it could also be things like testing. So it could be developing a new test for Parkinson's, for example, although we're very focused just on treatments. Now, most of these biotechs will be fairly small, but they do come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. And the goal of a biotech is to have a great idea, have some IP, intellectual property that protects that idea, and then to go out and seek investment, usually from commercial sources. So biotechs might be seeking funding from venture capitalists. They might also be seeking funding from grant-making organisations. So like Innovate UK, for example, which is a government scheme. So they're seeking the funding to take their idea forwards and raise investment to get their new treatment as far along as possible. If a biotech is really successful, they are often bought as a whole package by a large pharmaceutical company. A pharmaceutical company will see what they've done and say, that looks really great. We're going to buy that product, that whole company, all the intellectual property associated with it, and bring it into our program and take it forwards. So that's what biotechs are usually trying to do, create new treatments, raise investment. Our virtual biotech is a little bit different. So we're not commercially focused. We're only focused on developing new treatments for Parkinson's. We don't mind if they don't have a commercial return. Also, we're not, unlike some biotechs, which will have labs and whole teams of scientists, we don't have that. We have a small in-house team, but instead of doing the scientific work ourselves, we will partner with others. There are lots of companies around the world who provide scientific services, and we can choose the best partners to deliver the work for us. That means we don't have to make investments in big teams of scientists or in actual kit or labs. We can do it all kind of virtually. And like I said, because we are focused on developing new treatments for Parkinson's, we also can take on projects that maybe a commercial biotech wouldn't. So we might take on projects that are more challenging or risky in terms of an investment. We might take on projects where there isn't a clear route to a financial return. So for example, we have already taken on clinical trials looking at repurposing. So drugs that are already available to treat other conditions, such as, nausea in cancer, we're looking to see if they could be helpful for people with Parkinson's. Now, if they are, because they're already available and they might be very cheap drugs, there isn't much chance of anyone making any money, but we don't mind that. In fact, that's good for us. So, we can take on quite different projects, and we can be very flexible about that. Also, this approach is really agile. So, because we can work with partners worldwide to deliver the science, we can, if something's not working, we take on a project we think looks great, but actually we find out there are big challenges, or it just doesn't deliver the results we were expecting, we can turn off the funding, we can shut that project down, and we can redirect the funding we have into something that looks more positive. So we call it virtual because we don't have a physical building, we don't have a place where we're doing this work, but we're doing it all across the world with different partners. And we also call it virtual because we're a bit different in that we're motivated by a completely different goal than a traditional biotech. So in practice, how does it work? We find an idea, so the light bulb on the left of the screen, a great idea for a new project. These ideas can come from anywhere. So far we've had ideas come to us from scientists at universities who come and say they've got a great idea for a new treatment for Parkinson's. We've had companies, actually biotech companies, coming to us and saying, we're doing this great work, we need investment. So we're starting to be a place that biotechs are recognizing as a great place to come to partner. We've also come up with our own ideas. So our drug discovery managers read the literature, monitor the what's going on in the field of Parkinson's research. They go to conferences globally and pick up the new, the exciting ideas in the space, so that we can then think about our own projects and create our own projects in-house. Once we have a project and it's approved for funding, we will go out and we will work with partners. So on the bottom there, the green bubble, the blue bubble, the pink bubble, we will find the right partners to deliver the work we need. So if it's drug discovery, so the molecule bubble there, we will seek a contract research organization, a partner who can do the experiments that we know that need to be done. We'll plan the work with them and have a really clear project plan to deliver the experiments and start to develop and test and refine those molecules. We'll look to do, so the middle stage there is looking at things like the final preclinical testing, manufacturing, all these sort of logistical areas that need to be considered when you're developing a new medicine. How are you going to make it? How will you put it into a pill? That kind of thing. And then finally, at the clinical trial stage, we'll look for partners who can actually deliver clinical trials with us. So that might be, often is working with clinicians in the NHS, but it could also be with a commercial organisation. And everything that we do is about making that process as efficient as possible. I think what the virtual biotech brings is, that expertise in understanding what steps are needed to get a treatment from the start and a great idea and turning it into a reality, and making sure we're forward planning, understanding what pharmaceutical companies will look for in a project so that they will take it on. If we miss a stage or we don't get high enough quality data, it might mean that they decide to go with something else. So we need to be really, really strategic in how we plan and execute these projects. And that's what we're doing with the Virtual Biotech program. So it launched in 2017, as I've mentioned, and we now have a really interesting and diverse portfolio of projects. So these are some of our early stage projects, so ones that are in drug discovery and development. So we've currently got 5 active projects in this space. We've got one project looking to create molecules that can dial down inflammation in the brain, one looking at finding ways to boost cell recycling. We've got a couple that are looking at restoring brain cell batteries, so the mitochondria that I mentioned earlier. And we have ones looking, all of these are actually looking to slow down the course of Parkinson's, actually address the root causes of why brain cells die, so that we can actually create drugs that can either slow down the course of the progression of Parkinson's or potentially stop or reverse it. So we've got some really exciting projects going on here, and actually my colleague Jan will be talking to this group in a few days' time about one of these projects that has shown some real potential and has moved moved forward really quickly. So lots of exciting results to share there. On the clinical side, so projects that are already being tested in people with Parkinson's, we have, again, a lot of different projects. So I won't go through all of them, but we have both projects here that are looking at treatments that are going to improve symptoms in the shorter term. So things looking at, can we develop better treatments for hallucinations or Parkinson's related psychosis? But also one looking at dyskinesia, which my colleague Shona will be talking to this group about in a few days' time, as well as looking at drugs that could potentially slow progression. And I think that balance is really also very important to us in the biotech portfolio. We're not just looking at things that could be disease modifying for the future. We're also looking for therapies that could help people with really difficult, challenging symptoms where we don't have good therapies already that could be helpful in the shorter term. So we have a really broad range of projects going on that we're really excited about. And Shona will be talking about the dyskinesia project, which we've been working on now since pretty early. I think we started that project in 2018, and now it's getting to the point of it's recently completed the first trial in people with Parkinson's, and the results from that are starting to come out and are looking promising. So if you can tune in for that, I would definitely recommend it. Okay, so I'm not sure how long I've been talking for, but I think that was about all I was going to cover today. I hope that I've helped to demystify a little bit how our Parkinson's Virtual Biotech program works in practice, why it's a bit different to our usual approach, which is really just giving out grants to researchers based at universities and hospitals. We're still continuing to do that, by the way. We haven't stopped doing that basic research funding. This is an additional string to our bow and something that we think has been a missing piece actually in the Parkinson's landscape. So we're very excited about it, and we're hoping that this year we'll have lots of exciting results to share from the Virtual Biotech program, and hopefully also new projects to launch. But I'll stop there, and thank you very much for your attention.
And we will organise also a Q&A session for the whole series in later on in the summer. So we look forward to that. So thank you very much, Claire.
See us on URL youtube.com/@PenPRIG. Join us in URL facebook.com/groups/PenPRIG. Reach us by email, contact@penprig.org.uk.